One thing about living in Santa Carla I never could stomach. All the damn vampires.
Hello.
Vampire the Masquerade, or just VTM for short, is a tabletop RPG in which players take on the role of the classic literary vampire, attempting to survive undeath in a gritty reflection of our own world, known as the World of Darkness. Since the game's inception in 1991, and despite all the highs and lows it would suffer throughout the years to come, which we will absolutely be getting into, Vampire the Masquerade has still existed as a cult classic amongst the RPG community as a whole. All of that being said, I was surprised that there was not an iceberg for this game created yet. So I got to work, and I made this thing. Right, so admittedly, a World of Darkness iceberg, the universe that Vampire the Masquerade takes place in, a World of Darkness iceberg was created on Reddit by a user named Neonkestrel, and I have used some of their Vampire the Masquerade entries in my own iceberg, in this one. And I will be sure to credit them when necessary. A link to their iceberg is in the description, by the way. Neonkestrel, if you're watching this, thank you. Man, I just need to hurry up and get good at being on mic and on camera already. This is painful to watch. Right, so just a couple more things before we begin. First things first, as any World of Darkness fan knows, digging through all the lore of Vampire the Masquerade, of any World of Darkness game, can be a pretty difficult thing to do. So, just a disclaimer, don't expect me to have every single cool, obscure thing covered. If you can recommend me any good entries, feel free to comment them below so we can add them in future revisions. Second thing, I apologize ahead of time for the amount of times you're gonna hear me say and because I have a lot of getting used to on this thing. Oh, and don't be surprised if I get some of these entries wrong. It's bound to happen. Alright, so that was a pretty decent amount of stuff to go over. But with all that in mind, hello everyone, and welcome to my Vampire the Masquerade iceberg. I thank you all ahead of time for joining me. Also, the light's red now. I'm hitting stop recording, but it's not. Right, so the first layer of this iceberg specifically begins with introductory concepts. The first purpose of being here is to serve as a foundation for future entries that we'll be discussing later on in the iceberg, as well as to be here for the newer folks among you who are new to the World of Darkness or Vampire the Masquerade in general. So our first entry to kick us off is the Old World of Darkness, or the World of Darkness in general. We'll discuss new and old in just a moment. The World of Darkness is the universe that Vampire the Masquerade and several other games take place in. It was created by Whitewolf Publishing alongside Vampire the Masquerade in the year 1991. And the universe is essentially a dark, dystopian, gritty reflection of our own world in which paranormal and supernatural creatures exist all around us, hidden in plain sight. There are several editions of Vampire the Masquerade that have been released throughout the years, typical of any RPG. As previously mentioned, there was Vampire the Masquerade First Edition, which was released in the year 1991. Second edition was released in 1992, and that lasted until 1998, to which Vampire the Masquerade Revised Edition was released. Revised Edition would last from 1998 until 2004, when Whitewolf would completely reboot Vampire the Masquerade and the World of Darkness as a whole into what became Chronicles of Darkness. Vampire the Masquerade became Vampire the Requiem. This lasted until the year 2011, 20 years after 1991, so in 2011, the 20th anniversary of Vampire the Masquerade, the original, as well as the original World of Darkness, Whitewolf resurrected the series into Vampire the Masquerade version 20. This would last until 2018, when this monster was released. Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition. The reason I bring up all these different versions of the game is to say that this iceberg will contain entries that come from every single game, including Vampire the Requiem, which technically shouldn't be here because it's Vampire the Masquerade. Oh well. By the way, I have my phone with me because I'm using this to take my notes so I can... Oh, is that a text? Oh, hey. The Old World of Darkness, as we currently call it, specifically references every single game released from 1991 up to 2004. So Vampire the Masquerade 1st and 2nd edition, as well as revised. Each game explores different moods and themes that are certainly reminiscent of the time that they were released in. I'll put it this way. By the time Vampire the Masquerade was released in the year 1991, this was a time in which legendary vampire flicks, like, I had to write them out. The Lost Boys, The Hunger, From Dusk Till Dawn, Interview with a Vampire, Blade, John Carpenter's Vampires, Night Flyer. This is a time in which all of these movies came out within like 10 to 15 years of each other. So you know for damn sure that the early days of Vampire the Masquerade are just full of goth and punk imagery, counterculture to the extreme, romance and iconoclasm. Or another way to put it, vampires in leather jackets, crying blood, holding a rose, and they have a shotgun. The New World of Darkness, more specifically referring to Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition and all of the current, games like Swan Song and other games that have been released more recently within using the VTM IP, are a lot more tame. To put it simply, the more modern era of vampire is a lot more to do with conspiracies, and it's a lot more grounded. It's a lot more like Mr. Robot or something. I'll be honest, you can apply either themes to either Old World of Darkness or New World of Darkness. I'm just trying to paint a picture for you. Blah. Right, so that brings us to our next entry, which is The Masquerade. The Masquerade is an organized campaign/conspiracy primarily tasked with ensuring that the greater world at large does not believe in the existence of vampires whatsoever. And it is enforced by vampiric society at large, namely factions like the Camarilla or Camarilla. More on that to come. The Masquerade is the first and most important of 6 traditions, that's traditions with a capital T, a series of fundamental laws that are believed to have been passed down by the first vampire himself. More on him to come as well. I know you're going to hear me. Maybe you're going to hear me say that a lot, but don't worry, I'm going to take care of you. The concept of masquerade existed throughout most of vampiric history. However, it became like the primary focal point. It became important enough to be the title of the game in the year
1493,
after a famous speech was delivered in response to the Catholic Church's inquisition against the undead that was ravaging throughout Europe at the time, among other factors. While the concept of masquerade has existed for years, for probably all since the first vampire, there are several factions who, while they acknowledge it and sometimes begrudgingly practice it, there are those like the Subpar, more on them to come as well, who would rather see a world in which the masquerade is not necessary in any capacity. They wouldn't have to worry about humans killing them and delivering a final death because we would be enslaved and they would rule over us. Typical bad guy stuff, right? In my opinion, I think one of the most important things to understand about the masquerade is this. The answer isn't always a cover-up. Let me explain. See, when a breach occurs, typically disinformation campaigns, cover-ups, and psyops are routinely deployed, right? Often with the task of removing the evidence, of making it like it never happened, which makes perfect sense. But as we move further into the information age, the age where a digital footprint remains forever, let's say a vampire feeding on someone is leaked onto social media and is spread like wildfire all over the internet. It may draw more attention to you if you tried to get rid of it, you and your brood of vampire cronies, right? It may draw more negative attention to them if they tried to get rid of it than if they leaned into it. It might be better to say, haha, what terrible CGI, and then watch in the comment section as everyone begins to agree. There are, in fact, undead vampires who have massive followings on social media, hiding beyond plain sight at that point. I mean, they have the spotlight on them, but we'll talk about that. Right, so all of this information about the Masquerade brings us to our next entry, which is that of the traditions. As previously mentioned, the traditions are a series of fundamental laws that are believed to have been first passed down by the first vampire, Cain. As mentioned before, we'll get to him. There are 6 traditions, of which in the modern Knights especially play a backbone in Camarilla society primarily. Some people say Camarilla, some people say Camarilla. I'm American, so I haven't gone through the traditions in quite a while, and I didn't really want to sit down and write like a script for them, so I figured we'd go over it together. The first tradition is that of the Masquerade. You already know what that is. The second tradition is that of the domain. Thy domain is thine own concern. All others owe thee respect while in it. None may challenge thy word in thy domain. Essentially what this is saying is that a vampire's hunting ground is theirs absolutely. Their word is law. The third tradition is that of the progeny, and reads, Thou shalt only sire another with the permission of thine elder. If thou createst another without thine elder's leave, both thou and thy progeny shall be slain. The third tradition really highlights the harsh disciplines and self-punishment that vampires have to invoke in order to maintain the Masquerade, in order to stay hidden from the world at large. The Elder, generally speaking, is typically the one who created you, or the one who rules over you within your vampiric sect. Right, the next tradition, the fourth tradition, is that of the accounting. Those thou create are thine own children. Until thy progeny shall be released, thou shalt command them in all things. Their sins are thine to endure. Essentially, this is accountability. Their actions are my responsibility. I have to teach you, how to drink blood. I gotta show you your newfound life first, and only then, when you understand that, can I release you off when you get your vampire black belt. The fifth tradition is that of the hospitality. It reads, Honor one another's domain. When thou comest to a foreign city, thou shalt present thyself to the one who ruleth there. Without the word of acceptance, thou art nothing. Essentially what this is saying is to honor the domain of others, and whenever entering another vampire's domain, to make your presence known. The sixth tradition is that of the destruction. Thou art forbidden to destroy another of thy kind. The right of destruction belongeth only to thine elder, and only the eldest among thee shall call the blood hunt. So right, pretty self-explanatory. Essentially what this is saying is that it is forbidden to kill another vampire. Vampires do not kill other vampires. That is one of the worst sins, but not as bad as another, which we will soon touch on. I think you kind of understand the role that they play within the universe at large. So, we will move on. Right, so at this point, if you are newer to the world of darkness, if you're new to Vampire the Masquerade, you're probably wondering just what exactly makes what is a vampire, right? What makes a vampire interesting from a mechanical perspective, and I think more importantly, what makes them so fun to play from a gameplay perspective? I mean, surely they're pretty straightforward, right? You just drink some blood and, you know, I drink blood and I do the Twilight thing, and then, you know, sad, and I have a terrible tragic love story, and it's just better. Vampires, or kindred, are undead immortal beings animated by
the consumption of
blood, or vitae. Kindred is created via the embrace. When a mortal is drained of their blood by a vampire, then fed some of the vampire's own blood whilst the victim slips into death. To which, after a rather unpleasant period of time, they too become a vampire. Their appearance remains as it was during their death. Kindred are immortal and do not die from illness, nor do they biologically age. In order for a kindred to continue its existence, it must feed on mortal humans and animals, and, with some exceptions, feeding on a living human's blood directly from the skin, also known as the kiss, is preferred. They cannot eat food and will typically vomit it back up. With some exception, of course, more on that to come. Within all humans is the id versus the ego, the id being the animalistic personality within us. The kindred develops a predatory id known as the beast, that which possesses a terrible fear of fire and sunlight. When a kindred loses their humanity, the beast fully envelops them, and the vampire is forever lost, called the Wight. That's white, like W-I-G-H-T, like, what's that, Germanic folklore or something? White? Yeah, you get it. Gameplay-wise, this is reflected via a humanity score within the character sheet. When that score falls to 0, you essentially give your storyteller your character sheet and they rip it up. Most kindred possess supernatural prowess and abilities known as disciplines that enhance their survivability as well as their physical, mental, or emotional capabilities. Most kindred come from a supernatural bloodline that makes each of them unique to one another, called a clan. And when a mortal is embraced, they become the clan of their sire. Each of these unique clans possesses a supernatural curse equally unique to them. Oh, and no, garlic, okay, maybe there's like 1 or 2 exceptions, but garlic doesn't do anything. That was more of a rabies thing, but whatever. There are many other facts we could go over, many unique traits about vampires that we can discuss, but for now, we're just going to put a pin on it and bring up other traits and features when necessary. Hello, it's me, Future Farsight, or Sleepy Jack, or whatever I'm calling me. I don't know. I was editing the video and I realized I didn't even touch on like the gameplay aspect. I just talked about basic vampire physiology, which is really interesting, sure, but what does all that translate to in a gameplay sense? So when you play a game of Vampire the Masquerade, you are essentially juggling several different aspects about your character on a very mechanical level. You see, in the game there is a humanity score, a willpower score, and the amount of blood that your character possesses within their body. If you recall, I mentioned that when a vampire's humanity drops to 0, they become a Wight, meaning that's it, game over. So what makes the gameplay so interesting is that while you're going about your business, you have to commit these acts of terrible sin, you know, breaking into people's houses and like drinking their blood or whatever, which reduces your overall humanity. In addition to doing that, you're trying to perform certain things that increase your humanity, right? So it's part of this juggling act. Part of what helps you do that is your willpower score, which is another tracker. It essentially just lets you re-roll your dice. And then finally, there is the blood score, of which every night, whenever a vampire rises each night, they instantly gain a point of hunger. That's another way to refer to it as your hunger score, the amount of blood you have. So, and when a vampire is completely taken over by their hunger, they go completely feral and attack the nearest source of blood they can find so that they can feed, to which they can regain humanity and gain control of their character. Gameplay wise, you just straight up lose control of your character entirely. They just, oh, I hope you weren't trying to not kill that guy because he's dead. I think you can kind of figure out the implications from a gameplay perspective what this means. You're not just running around like, I wear a leather jacket and I have a shotgun. Actually like playing these juggling acts, trying to maintain willpower, which helps you maintain your humanity as well as maintaining your hunger. So I'm telling you all this because I'm trying to indoctrinate you. Come to me, join my game. Alright, so moving into our next entry, we have major and minor clans. So to put it simply, in Vampire the Masquerade, every vampire belongs to a unique clan. As if you recall, when a vampire embraces a mortal, that mortal becomes the same breed, if you will, of vampire that their sire was. So, bloodlines, right? And the general belief is that all of them, if you follow up the vampire family tree high enough, they all trace back to a common ancestor, usually believed to be Cain, the first vampire. Originally, I was going to go through the list of all the 13 major clans in the game, but I'll be real. There is documentation and videos and wikis and all sorts of stuff for you to read and look up online to find out what clan you find the most attractive to you, which, vampire family do you belong to? No, I'm not saying what those two words are together now, vampire and family. Ugh. No, instead, I'm going to bastardize the entirety of all the clans and read you these criminally generalized summaries of each clan. Yeah, so, starting out with Clan Banu Hakim. I wrote, secretive assassins that kept to themselves and rarely branch out to others outside of their own. They're like the Faceless Men from Game of Thrones or the Dark Brotherhood from the Elder Scrolls. Their clan bane, thanks to an old blood curse put upon them by a different vampire clan, Clan Tremere, prevents them from drinking another vampire's blood without suffering excruciating pain. Oh, and one more note about Clan Banu Hakim, by the way. In the older versions of the game, their old clan bane, the old curse unique to their bloodline that they possessed, made their skin darker as they grew with time. Next up, we have Clan Bruja, or Bruja. I wrote that they are counterculture rebels and free thinkers. They are literally the Lost Boys. Their clan bane makes them more prone to violent outbursts and succumbing to the beast and entering frenzy. Okay, yeah, that's just facts. By the way, when I wrote these, this was like shortly after I went to a concert with some buddies and we were kind of trashed, and I was like, I need to get the script done, so this is as fun for me as it is for you, I'm sure. Next up, we have Clan Gangrel. Werewolves, except not werewolves, they're just super in tune with nature and are part animal. Every time they frenzy, they gain a permanent animal feature. That is their clan bane. Okay, yeah, pretty accurate. Clan Hecata. Master scholars and necromancers comprised of several different, now extinct clans. Basically, if Dr. Frankenstein turned into a vampire. Their clan bane makes the act of feeding excruciatingly painful for the victim. Facts, yeah. Next up, we have Clan La Sombra. Power-hungry social climbers with the arrogance of a James Bond villain, except they can manipulate shadows. Facts. Next, we have Clan Malkavian. Unhinged lunatics who experience vampirism as if it was Silent Hill. Their clan bane ensures they constantly suffer from some sort of mental derangement. Also facts. Although usually, whenever I see people portray Malkavians, they usually just turn into Harley Quinn wannabes. Right, next up we have Clan Ministry. Seekers of ancient knowledge and antiquity with roots from ancient Egypt. Basically, Indiana Jones is a vampire. Their clan bane grants them a horrendous fear to light beyond what other kindred suffer. I don't know how I feel about that one, it's like mostly true. Next, we have Clan Nosferatu. Twisted beings whose vampirism has caused their physical bodies to mutate into a horrendous shell of its former living form. Basically, if Nosferatu was a vampire. Next, we have Clan Ravnos. Primarily Indian mystics and vagabonds whose vampirism grants them a love of tempting death by performing and acting in dangerous manners. Their clan bane prevents them from staying in one place for more than 7 nights. I'll be real, I think that's the one clan I know virtually nothing about, so that could be true or not. I'm gonna believe it. Next, we have Clan Toreador, the undead whose vampiric nature manifests in the form of artistic beauty and expression. Obligatory Twilight joke. When in a place not deemed adequately beautiful enough for them, their clan bane causes them to suffer. Yeah, I think that's still true. Next, we have Clan Tremere. Blood sorcerers and mages who invoke science and magic to unlock otherworldly power. Their curse prevents them from creating blood bonds, and ghouls require more blood to sustain them. More on those subjects to come. Next, we have Clan Shimizi, flesh sculpting masochists and sadists with a fascination with eldritch secrets. Their curse prevents them from resting without some form of personal artifact or totem in proximity to them, such as grave soil. Yes. Clan Ventru. Prideful, often chivalrous kindred whose vampirism makes them ruthlessly power-hungry, full-on corporate CEO style. The clan bane forces them to drink blood only from a specific source, such as specifically blonde women or men over 30, etc., etc. Keep that in mind for later. That was extremely disrespectful to all of those clans, so totally worth it. So what about the minor clans? Well, to keep it simple, these are 13 of the major clans in the game. However, there are several other clans that exist throughout the series that are essentially clans within clans. To keep it simple, we will cover them when needed. So, looking at our next entry, Ghouls and Blood Bonds. Right, so we know what happens when a vampire drinks the blood of the living, right? They gain superpowers, they become immortal, etc., etc. What happens when a human, or an animal, or even another vampire drinks a vampire's blood? The opposite effect. Well, this is where ghouls and blood bonds come into play. A ghoul is a human who has constantly drank the blood of a vampire, of a specific vampire, to a point that they become completely subservient to the vampire. You see, whenever a human drinks a vampire's blood, the effects are akin to like a super drug of some sort, and humans will actually begin to gain physical, mental, and emotional powers of their vampiric master, of the source of the blood. So, perfectly normal human could drink enough blood and start ripping doors off of cars and stuff like that. When a human has vitae inside their system, they no longer biologically age. When the vitae or blood runs out of a ghoul, of the human, they rapidly age. Their age catches up to make up the difference. Meaning that, you know, a several 100-year-old ghoul that runs out of blood basically gets Thanos snapped. Another thing you must know is that despite all the positives that come with drinking vampire blood, the absolutely massive negative is that it is extremely addicting, and you will become completely a victim to that vampire. Early stages of vitae addiction are relatively subdued and are like typically any other drug. That is to say, you will be thinking about the source, the vampire. As time goes on and as your addiction worsens, you will soon find yourself unable to even pull away remotely from the vampire's presence. You can even form a paranormal link or bond between them. The vampire could call to you in the night, and you would hear their voice and you would answer their beckoning. The same things happen when a vampire drinks another vampire's blood, which you can imagine is pretty dangerous. The ultimate takeaway is don't drink a vampire's blood unless you are their best friend and they have their interests looking out for you. And just, I take that all back. Don't do drugs, even vampire blood drugs. Not worth it. But if you know a guy who has vitae, hello again, it's me. Past me, the future. Our next entry is that of Diablerie, also known as Amaranth. If you recall, a little bit ago I mentioned one of the greatest vampiric sins. Diablerie is, generally speaking, considered the worst offender, the worst of sins, as outlined in the traditions. Diablerie is effectively vampiric cannibalism. It is when one vampire completely drains the blood of another vampire, to which the victim's soul gets slipped into the Diablerist. Best case scenario, this means that they adopt the victim's powers, they increase in generation, gain the knowledge and the disciplines and abilities that the victim has. Again, best case scenario. What typically happens is their body becomes intertwined in this wrestle with another soul, with the victim's soul, if their soul is powerful enough. Another way to put it, there have been examples of the past where one vampire diablerizes another vampire, and the victim, way later in the future, their soul takes over the body of the Diablerist, right? So they essentially get another chance at life. They take control of the Diablerist. I don't want to get into it too much, but one example off the top of my head, I believe it was the year 1133. The founder of Clan Tremere, the Blood Sorcerers, Tremere himself, in pursuit of achieving higher power, diablerized the antediluvian. Antediluvian, by the way, is a term referring to a vampire who has existed since before the biblical flood. Tremere diablerized the founder of the basically extinct Clan Salubri, known as Saulot. Tremere's soul would go on to wrestle with Saulots throughout the years to come, until finally, in I believe 1999, Saulot regained or took over Tremere's body and essentially became Tremere. So there is a sentient being with a consciousness of a person who has existed since the beginning of humankind. And they're probably in New York or something. So our next entry is the Riddle, and it simply goes as such. A beast I am, lest a beast I become. It is simply a saying that encapsulates the very identity, the struggle that a vampire must constantly go through within its existence. They must perform bestial actions in order to suppress an even greater evil that is still themselves. Think about it long enough, it kind of opens up the trains of thought that kind of allow you to see just what makes being a vampire so interesting, with that in mind from a character study perspective, Quickly moving on to the next one, we also have Humanity and the Eternal Struggle. I put this directly after the Riddle because it's just the same thing. We also touched on Humanity before. A vampire has to follow a road or a path that essentially dictates what is considered good and bad in their minds. It's kind of like the alignment system in Dungeons & Dragons, lawful, neutral, chaotic, evil, etc., except it's much more specific. Generally speaking, almost all humans follow the path of humanity, and the average person sits at about humanity
6 or 7.
Side note, by the way, humanity 10 is virtually non-existent for humans and vampires alike. And you have to keep in mind that the higher your humanity is, the harder it is to maintain, right? Because if your humanity is too high, then something as bad as killing a cockroach might send you off into a friggin' spiral. Alright, new day, new recording. Our next entry is that of major factions. So, there exist several different types of vampiric factions, all of which perform and believe and act in unique ways. We are just going to go over the major ones and bring up more of the minor ones, of course, when necessary. The major factions are that of the Camarilla, or Camarilla, the Anarchs, and the Sabbat. Some could also argue that the Black Hand might also be a major faction. There's also the... For now, we're just going to focus on the three. To go over the factions, I think it would be easier if we go on a bit of a walk through history, if you will. We will start in the year
1493.
There was a famous speech given at during an event known as the Convention of Thorns. The Convention of Thorns was a monumental event throughout vampiric history that involved several factions of the up-and-coming Camarilla, members of the Anarchs, etc., etc. The Convention of Thorns was created in response to the Catholic Church's inquisition against the undead spreading throughout Europe, but also something known as the First Anarch Revolt had begun to occur. Let's put it this way. Imagine you were a 500-year-old vampire who's lived in a castle and you've been doing your thing for 500 years, right? You embrace a vampire, and then they go and embrace another vampire, and it just continues on, but you're the king of the castle. Well, imagine from this perspective, humans, because we're vampires, right? We can only operate in the nighttime. So throughout the daytime, as humans continue to expand throughout Europe, some of these humans soon pose a threat to your castle, your 500-year-old kingdom, right? You notice that your outer villages start being burned down, right? Vampires start being staked and torched and thrown into the daylight, etc., etc. You, being your 500-year-old vampire self, would probably say, okay, you little guys at the bottom of my, European feudal vampiric food chain, the lowest of the low, the neonates, you guys go deal with the problem. You would probably feel in the right? I mean, hey, you created them after all. You've been running this kingdom for 500 years, so have the little guys do it. Now let's imagine you're the little guy, and you are disgusted when you realize, like, oh my god, this guy's not even looking after me. He's just sending us to die. He's not even doing anything on his end of the big guy up there. And then you realize, oh, this is happening, like this exact scenario is happening basically all throughout Europe, right? All the 500 plus year old vampires are sitting in their castles and they're like, I want nothing to do with that nonsense. So, naturally, all of your vampire homies and the rest of you being, eaten up by the machine probably are gonna band together. And then you could see that's where the Anarch Revolt would come into play, right? Right back to the mid-15th century. So now we have a situation where we have these anarchs going around and they're just doing whatever they want. They're basically pirates, right? All the first anarch revolts, they revolt together and then they go and they kill the 500-year-old vampire from the previous example. He's dead now. And so now we have humans killing every vampire, and then we have these anarchs killing some other vampires, and everything's a mess, right? That was a lot to go over, but I think you see, like, it's a mess right now, right? Vampiric royalty from all different clans decided, like, okay, let's all chill out and we're gonna have a convention held in, I believe it was Thorns, England, and that is when in
1493
the Convention of Thorns was held. And it was essentially held by all these upper echelons of vampiric society who would soon become Camarilla, or I think they were Camarilla at that point, but anyway, you'll see where I'm getting at. This convention had a bunch of vampires from all over, as well as representatives of the anarchs who held the Anarch Revolt. So you got like the rebels, you got these guys here, all meeting together to try to come up with a plan, a solution to not only work together, work as one against a common enemy that is the humans, but also what to do about the humans, right? Well, a famous speech was delivered by a certain Raphael de Corazon, in which he ultimately promoted the idea that the anarchs and the to-be Camarilla should band together under a set of kind of like rules under some form of greater faction. And his solution to the whole issue with people, with humans and all that stuff, was the Masquerade itself, was to hide away from the shadows and operate from the darkness. This would ultimately form the backbone, this event would ultimately form the backbone of Camarilla as we know it today. And you can think of the Camarilla as the most powerful and most organized vampiric faction within the world of darkness. You can essentially think of it like the shadow government beneath the real world government. It handles, vampiric affairs and primarily serves to enforce the traditions. The main one being the Masquerade, of course. Ultimately, it would serve as a victory for the Camarilla. The revolt would be quenched, and, hey, the Masquerade will go full in force. Not all vampires agreed with this solution. Some believe, this is ridiculous. We're powerful creatures who are immortal, and, we have the wisdom of hundreds of men. Why should we hide from humans? We should be ruling over them. And the vampiric clans who primarily held those beliefs came from that of Clan La Sombra and Clan Shemitzi. Those who disagreed with the solution broke away into what became known as the Sabbat. They were just the vampires who were like, yo, screw the Masquerade, we just want a party, rock on, no government, we get to feed on whoever, kill whoever. If the Camarilla are constantly working to suppress the beast, the Sabbat, they call it riding the wave of vampirism, and they love it. So those who refused to join the Sabbat but ultimately didn't agree with the Camarilla ultimately remained as anarchs, though a majority of them became Sabbat. As time would pass, a lot of the Sabbat, these rebellious vampires who wanted freedom, would actually push westward and expand into the New World, leaving the Camarilla and the more organized vampiric factions behind in Europe. As you can probably guess, to this day, the Camarilla, the Anarchs, and the Sabbat still continue to exist. The Anarchs primarily existing for a variety of reasons, right? All three factions still exist to this day. The Sabbat mostly exist hidden deep underground. When they make their attacks, they go hard. The Inquisition, by the way, also ultimately would continue to exist into the modern nights, into what is now known as the Society of Saint Leopold. Now, I'm not talking about modern vampire hunters with the stake and the hammer. We're talking SCP Containment Breach, SWAT guys with underbarrel stake launchers. It's crazy. So the ultimate takeaway is that the Camarilla, or Camarilla, is a worldwide shadow government that is for vampires. The Anarchs exist for a variety of reasons, but primarily to be free of the Camarilla and the kind of old feudalism and status quo they impose on vampiric society. The Sabbat just want to overthrow everything, live in a world in which they can kill off anyone who doesn't agree with them. Only the strong may survive. Humans are enslaved, etc., etc. And I'm being very, very general here. Of course I am. There's so much history to go into between all of them. So, all right. That finally brings us to our last introductory concept, which we will keep real nice and brief, and it is that of real-world quotes. Throughout the book, as previously mentioned, there are several real-life quotes that exist throughout. I'd probably make an iceberg on by itself, all those weird random quotes that they like to use. This is Vampire the Masquerade 2nd edition. I have 2 quotes here for you. The first goes, "Its motor whirs and colors curl, inside your head the monsters whirl." That is a line from Susie and the Banshees' Carousel.
Its motor whirs and colors curl, inside your head the monsters whirl.
I also got another one here. "The one thing about living in Santa Carla that I could never stomach is all the damn vampires." Grandpa the Lost Boys, I gotta rewatch that. And that's it. Finally, we got all the introductory concepts over with. I'm taking a shower. I hope I don't look terrible. So that's it for now. I thank you all so much for watching this video. I will say just some closing words. Going forward, I already have revisions I want to make to the iceberg. I want to add Fishmalk and Lambek Ruthven, however you say those words. You know, I just thank y'all for being able to sit through this and listen to me stagger my way through figuring out how all this stuff works. I know this video is pretty messy and is full of inconsistent audio and blah, 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 blah. So, you know, I'll work to get better. I think I will get better, actually. I feel pretty confident. I hope this video isn't considered terrible, because if it is, dang. I will be sure to, as you can probably imagine, I just went on Google and was just downloading images I could find. So I'll try to be better in giving credit to any art that I find. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, so, you know, if you see your art in here, please just let me know and I'll be sure to, you know, add some sort of credit. Yes. And, I mean, that's it for now. I'll try to have the next part going. But yes, until next time, thank you for watching. And shout out to Windigoon. Okay, bye.